This is Art 490, Art of the Baroque, and this video is on Rembrandt. Rembrandt was born in 1606, just a few years before Caravaggio died, and he lived till 1669. And so his life coincided with the huge rise of economic prosperity that occurred. It's called the Dutch Golden Age, and in that period, uh, there were a lot of self-made rich people, and those people got together into groups and civic societies of one kind or another. And we saw this before with Franz Hals and the officers of the militia. You know, they get together and they have their portrait made, and they, uh, unlike the previous pictures of such civic associations, where everyone's lined up in rows and you know, unimaginatively, Halls had this idea of making them do something. They're all celebrating, and so all their personalities are being displayed, and you can just see them lively. And that was a great innovation. It was just a few years before this picture, when Rembrandt came along. You know, he took that a little farther. This is called the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp. Dr. Tulp is the man in black here, demonstrating an anatomy from this cadaver on the table. This is a man who, a criminal who had been executed just that morning. Anatomy lessons like this were something that were held once a year. It was a big social event, and a bunch of doctors would come and you know, witness this anatomical lesson. And the doctors here are, you know, middle-aged men who are all successful in their trade, and they paid to have themselves represented in this picture, and they wanted to show themselves the way you would in a group picture. But Rembrandt has a different take on it, both from the uh, the previous way that group portraits were made, and from the way Hals did it, because in Hals' group, that officers group were not behaving like officers. They weren't doing what they actually do in terms of being in the military. But here, the doctors are actually doing something that is part of their profession. They're watching an anatomy lesson, and he's made it such that they are sort of engaged in it in a dramatic way. And you look, it's a very dark room with light pouring in from somewhere, perhaps a window or a skylight, and so you have all this dramatic lighting, similar to what Caravaggio would have. But the people are represented as though they are just, you know, look at them. They're leaning in. They're engaged in the performance. We see the anatomist here, Dr. Tulp. He's showing the muscles of the hand and the arm. He's lifted up a few of the flexors, I guess. No, extensors. No, the flexors. These are the flexors, I believe. And they are. He's showing just the ones that one uses to create the gesture that he's demonstrating here, putting the thumb and finger together, and they're all just looking at it as if they are. As if the most fascinating thing that they've ever seen. And you know, these are, you know, they're already doctors. They already know this stuff, and I suppose in the actual anatomy lesson, they wouldn't be like this. But Rembrandt is presented in this way so as to make a more interesting picture, to make a more dramatic image, as if it were, you know, like a theater image, and there's actors and they're performing and they're doing something of note and of moment. Here they are. They're all look. This one is looking at the book. There's the anatomy book, and they're comparing the actual uh, uh, anatomical features with, well, I guess, perhaps whatever is illustrated in the book. And they're all doing this in such a way so as to make a much more interesting portrait than you would have if they were just, you know, sitting for a portrait or even celebrating like the officers were. They're doing something that is part of their profession. Another contrast that you see with Hals is the technique. Look really close here. Hals, as you recall, his painting style was such that he just had these very quick gestural marks, and those marks were, you know, expertly applied in such a way as to create this strong illusion of reality, but with just a few quick gestures. But here, Rembrandt has polished it a great deal more, so that you don't see those individual brushstrokes, especially one of these early works where it's much more finished, much more polished. But he's gone a little farther than just uh, representing the surfaces of things. If you think of of, uh, of Caravaggio, for example, Caravaggio didn't do portraits. You know, his interest was, you know, he would, when you think of that basket of fruit, for example, you know, he wanted the minute details of every little aspect of the surface of a thing. In fact, when you think of all of the things that he did in his pictures, even the pictures of people, it's almost as if they're things. With Rembrandt, and what we're going to see with Rembrandt in his portraits, is that he's going a little farther than just the surfaces of things. He wants to see the expression. He wants you to see the person's thoughts and feelings. And you know, as he develops as an artist and becomes more adept at this, you know, it's as if uh, he's 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 getting at the soul of a person by showing you the expression and the way he's going to use paint. Here, let's look at the next work. Here's an example of a portrait, one of his, you know, something that also a commission work. This is a merchant, someone who became rich in trade, and his trade, as you might can tell from his outfit, is that he sold sable, the kind of fur. It comes from a, you know, weasel-like animal in Russia, and it's rather wonderful stuff. It's very soft and it's the most expensive sort of thing. When you look at his face, this is a man, this is like a first generation rich person, a self made rich person. And, you know, the artist has looked at his face and looked at every little, you know, nuance of the light and dark that's on his, but not just the surfaces of things. He wants to get at, you know, the character of this person. I mean, he is a, he looks like he's gone to a lot of trouble. He's looked like he's a businessman and he's very serious, and he's only paused for a moment to allow Rembrandt to paint his picture, and then he's going to go off and do some more work. And he's all of the worries that he has of his business, you know, are etched on his face, and that he's a man of import. And so uh, Rembrandt has illustrated him that way, and he's shown him what he is. That he's a man. He's rich. He's showing his wares of his trade with having this outfit like this, but he's not like he's showing off his wealth so much as demonstrating what he is, and he's showing the inner soul of this person with showing his character. Another thing that he would do is he did all these studies. You know, he would get people, you know, off the street, or, you know, like Rembrandt would. I mean, like Caravaggio would, or friends and neighbors who would come and pose for him wearing costumes, and he would just study light and dark and the relationship between the figure and ground. And these early works are like this in the sense that you have a figure, a very strong, dark shape here with on a lighter ground, and with a dramatic light and a kind of lighting that, you know, we call Rembrandt lighting, where part of the face is in light and part of it's in shadow, and usually the nose is the line between the light and the shadow. It gives a lot of character to the face, and it became a standard way of making portraits. But he's studying even then this person. This is not a you know, he's not a known sitter, but he wants to see the inner soul of a person and illustrate that, so that you can feel it. You understand the person's expression, his feelings. You can see his thoughts, and in the way that he represents the face. And it's notice that it's not like Hall's, where you can see every brushstroke and things. In fact, if you try to imagine painting such a thing, how do you even get paint to do all of these things? And it's rather miraculous what he's doing with it. Let's look at these sorts of details. He likes really, really sharp bits, the tiny little sharp um, contrasting bits in value, like this, these things like this, to contrast with other contrast, like the contrast between the figure and the ground. There is a degree of dark change from the dark shape to this lighter shape, but that's not nearly as great a contrast as there is in here. But he makes this very small, and it has the effect of sort of pushing those two things together as one. Okay, and also in his early career, he did works like this. This is Belshazzars Feast. It's a highly dramatic version of a Old Testament story where the king is sees the writing on the wall and he's extremely surprised. If you uh, look at his expression on his face, great big wide eyes, big sweeping gesture with this cape that he's wearing that with lots and lots of encrusted jewelry and stuff that's on it that it just made of little twisted bits of paint, but it resolves into this uh, what appears to be very highly detailed imagery of stuff. Look at all the expressions on the faces and all the gestures and everything. It's very theatrical and very dramatic. And he was very good at these history pictures, especially the religious pictures, which were um, you know really told the stories well. He was great at the storytelling aspect, but just the light and dark. This is a tenebristic picture like Caravaggio, but it seems to have much more theatricality compared to say a Caravaggio would. And if you remember, um, he didn't he didn't ever leave Holland. He didn't go out and study in Rome or in Venice or anything like that, um, like Velasquez or Rubens did. Though staying all his life in Holland, he was there at the crossroads of all this trade. So he was able to see imagery from other artists, whether when they were trading back and forth, and he would go to auctions. He even bought lots of art himself, and would uh, he was aware. And there was also Caravaggio followers who were uh, in Holland that he could study, and so he knew very well how how Caravaggio painted and all the followers of Caravaggio painted. So he was very good at this darkness, light, using light to tell the story, using light to create drama and everything. Uh, but that if that's all he did, if he would be just like one of the other Caravaggio followers in Holland, which are not in the major league. But what he's doing that's greater is that it's in the expression, and that it's in uh, the way he manipulates paint in such a way as to see the inner thoughts of people. Let's look at the Night Watch. It's one of the most famous pictures in the world, uh, and it's about 10 years or so after that anatomy lesson. This is 1642. And it's another one of those militia companies that like Hall's painted, but like the anatomy lesson, instead of having them all in a group portrait where they're being jovial or celebrating or something, this, because it's a militia group, he's showing them as if they're marshaling to war, as if they're actually going to fight, and they're all getting their weapons together and they're um, assembling for the purpose of doing something martial. So what we see here is they're in a space outdoors. There's a building back here. It's very dark. It's hard to see. There's an arch, and there's like they've just poured out from this archway out into the street. And perhaps there's another building here, and then just between the two buildings on the left, maybe the sun is pouring through. The early morning sun is pouring through and shining, picking out things out of the darkness. It's called the Night Watch, because in the 1800s, the varnish had turned so dark in this picture, it was very difficult to make out what was going on in the picture, and so people looked at it and thought that it was a night picture, and that it was called the Night Watch. But uh, these are actual known people. There's a captain here and a lieutenant, and all these people are named. In fact, you can see there's a thing on the back wall there with everybody's name on it, and they all paid to have their portrait made. And Rembrandt chose to represent them doing what it is that they do, or what they would do if they were actual soldiers. Um, as I said before, that these soldier groups, these militia uh, groups, had in the past been very important in terms of doing military actions and saving Holland. But in this generation, they're mostly just a group of drinking buddies who get together and pretend, like a volunteer fire department or something, where they're they spend most of the time just sort of pretending to be soldiers. So they're all dressed up and they all have their guns, and Rembrandt is sort of elevating the idea of this group of people from being just a bunch of citizen soldiers to actual people who are doing something of import. This is the commander here, standing, stepping towards into our space, and his hand here gesturing is the gesture to indicate this is time to go, is to um, to start. And his lieutenant here is in a brighter uniform than he is, standing there, and his hand, the light from over here, is casting a shadow onto the lieutenant's hand, onto his clothes. Um, let's look at it kind of close here. Nice high resolution image. Look at that hand. Wonderful foreshortening of it. We look at the shadow there. Look at this spear. Look how he makes the front end of the spear dark where the background is light. So it's darkest here and lightest here, so as to create the maximum contrast here. And then on this part of the spear, he makes this light against a dark background. He does that all the time. He's always very sensitive to figure and ground, and making one part of the figure dark against a light ground, another part light against a dark ground, as a way to sort of solve the figure ground problem. So as to make the figure and the ground, this sort of ambiguity is what's figure and what's ground. Look, for example, this edge right here. Goes in and out, and the sometimes the light part looks like a positive shape against a dark ground. In other parts, it looks like a positive shape against a light ground, all the way around. And this negative shape in here is coming forward as a positive shape. He does that all the time. And notice there's this contrast between what is bright and highly contrasted. This figure here, especially, and parts of this figure, and the bright red jumping out and the bright white jumping out, and then the lower contrast as you move farther away from the center and down till you get to, say, like this dog. Look at this dog. He's almost like a ghost of a dog. He's just barely sketched in. I mean, you think of, say, the dog in, I don't know, Rubens' Raising of the Cross. It has a dog in it, but the dog is exactly rendered as everything else is, and this dog is much more lively and seems to be moving. Not being able to see exactly where the edge of the dog is, especially right here, makes it look as though the dog was moving so fast that it couldn't be captured, almost like in a photograph where um, the shutter speed is too slow to capture a fast motion, so it creates a blur. It's wonderful to look around. I mean, if this picture is on your list, and you can look at this image to see, look at it as close as you want. You can see there's everywhere there's different degrees of contrast, and lots of places like this, just a tiny little, look at the edge of that spear, that tiny little bit of white to show you the edge. And this spear, he doesn't want to have it jump out towards you, like the one in the middle. This one is he wants this one to be more subdued. If you look at it in the whole thing, he wants this part to come out and have the greatest contrast right here, and he wants to downplay all this other part. Everybody is moving. Everybody is in the middle of action. There's a running man, a very short running man here. There's a man doing a um, I guess he's loading his musket, or maybe he's pulling out the ramrod or something. He's doing something to get ready. There's another man here who has a musket. You can see it's behind over here, and he's actually firing it. You can see that it is being fired right behind. There's smoke coming out. And this guy is saying, whoa, and is rearing back at, I guess he was just test firing or something. This little person here, sort of looks like a dwarf, female dwarf, is not one of the company, but is sort of represented as a kind of a mascot for the company. I think she has a dead chicken hanging from her belt here, and there's this purse here, and all. These are symbols. These have to do, like the claws of the chicken have something to do with the name of this company and the kind of company it is, and it's all, these are symbolic references. But notice how he's the contrast that she has with the dark ground, and how that she is being picked out in the light, so we can see her, and how he downplays other parts, picks out a few things that he wants to see, and puts everything else in shadow. And also these pikes. Look at that. Remember the pikes in the Velázquez's Surrender at Breda? There's a whole bunch of pikes on this side, all sort of lined up like this, but except they're all straight and in rows. But here they're all going in different directions. They're creating a kind of a chaos, adding energy, and that there's something exciting going on. There's chaos going on. Another thing is, look at the way he applies paint. Imagine doing this. Imagine if you had a palette and some paints and you wanted to recreate this look. How would you do that? It's different from a Hall's. When you look at Hall's, you can see that each brush stroke, you can see it. It's very clear. And if you wanted to paint, you could mimic it if you had the skill to do it. But here, where would you even start? How would you even make that look? There's a quote from Max Liebermann, an artist from the 20th century, who said, "Whenever I see a Frans Hals, I feel like painting. Whenever I see a Rembrandt, I feel like giving up." And really, it's just, I can't imagine what you would have to do to make this happen. How do you apply paint to make that happen? And when I look at it at this scale and say this looks like an impossible feat, but what the result of it is, that it's almost a magical photographic image of this surface material, the bronze or whatever this, the steel and the gilt of chasing of whatever this is, this armor this guy's wearing, and also the whatever fabric, expensive looking fabrics with gold threads in them and things that are making up all this decoration. It just looks photographic, but beyond photographic. It's like he's showing you a different reality. Anyway, so that's the night watch. All right. This is he was also a printmaker, and much of his prints he did some engravings, but a lot of them were etchings. And I should tell you, uh, etchings are different in that engravings you take a steel plate and you actually gouge out using a tool uh, the the part that's going to be the black lines, and we saw that in Durer's work. He would gouge out using a tool, but etchings are done with acid, and the way you do it is you take a flat plate and you coat it with something like wax or resin or something so as to that resists acid. And when you take a needle, a tool that has like a needle point, and you draw with it, uh, you scratch away a little bit of that surface, a resist surface, and when you put the whole thing in acid, the acid will eat the parts where the resist has been scratched away. And by doing that, it allows you to draw almost like you're drawing with a pen, and so you can get very very sharp lines, and the amount of acid eating into the metal can be uh, can be regulated by the amount of time you leave it in the acid, and you can do this over and over and over. You can etch it, take off the resist, you can print it, and then look at it and say, oh, it needs to be a little darker here, a little whatever, and then you can do it over and over uh, to create interesting tonal effects, and that was what he was big on, is in both in painting and in drawing and in etching is tonal quality. So this is a landscape that he did with using that technique. But the one that you have on your list is called the Three Crosses, and this is it in the first state when he did some etching on it, and made drawings of little figures here, and then he did some tonal things here, and to create this big dramatic light coming from above, shining down on the crucifixion scene, but throwing everything else sort of in darkness over on the side. There's lots and lots of people milling about, and lots of sort of chaos in here, with the Christ on the cross in the center and the two thieves on either side. Notice how he creates the tone with hatching, lots of little hatching, and these are hand done with a tool, like a pen, but at the end it's like a needle, and each mark is the scratching off of some sort of resist, like wax or resin of some sort. So you can just draw it as if you were drawing pin lines, and you notice how close together and how parallel they are. Sometimes these are done with a ruler. You take a ruler and make a line, and move the ruler a little bit, make another line, and just keep doing that. Notice that it crosses in different parts. And when it's crossing, he's trying to, he makes one area of tone. He says, oh, it needs to be a little darker, so he'll make hatches in another direction uh, to add more tone. Doing that, you can see that back here with these straight lines here, creating a little darker corner. But notice how all these little figures, and each one, how expressive it is. This is, I guess, it's Longinus, the one who realizes that this is the centurion who realizes this was the Son of God. Um, all the people, and just the tiniest bit of 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 marks to indicate so much expressiveness of these figures everywhere. And then after he had printed some prints of this, he went back and etched it some more. Again, adding more tone, making darkness, which is all you can do. You can only add uh, darkness. You can't take away. But now it's you've lost a lot of the detail of every individual person. It just becomes little bits of light and dark pattern, so that the emphasis is just on the stark contrast, and the whole mood changes as a result. It becomes a different thing. And so what he would have done is he would have printed a whole bunch of these, and then gone back to the plate, and then printed a whole bunch of these. So we'd have two different images. And I think there's more than um, this. I think is called the fourth state. So he would there are different stages within the whole process. All right, let's look at his self-portraits. And first, this is very early self-portrait. When he was young, and he's looking in the mirror and making faces, and that was the thing that he would do, since part of his stock and trade was expressions on faces. He would just look in the mirror and he would draw himself, and here he is, making a surprised expression. And if you look throughout his whole career, you could find any number of pictures of him doing faces like this. I think it's lots of them in the etchings, but I think he has maybe 40 self-portrait paintings, which he was throughout his whole career. He was making images of himself as part of his study of mankind. I mean, he wanted to understand and be able to express inner feelings by looking at the face. So when you look at his face in portraits, it's not like he's idealizing his face in any way. It's like he's almost like a scientist looking at his face and trying to discover just what it is about that face and what you can do with paint in order to bring that out, and not just what's on the surface, but what's inside. This is a nice one. It's just one really early on, when you can see another one of his techniques is using the back end of the brush, the point on the back, to scratch away paint. Like you can imagine this being wet paint here, and taking the brush, like a tool, and just scratching off to create a little bit of highlight, because underneath the paint is a lighter color, so he could just scratch away and make hair. You can see that create a little ridge there with a little highlight. But look how he's lit. The light is coming from behind his head, so that his face is in shadow, and that creates a whole different look, a different mood, and a different expression than one where you would see his face in bright light. Here's another one. Studies of expression, studies of how to use this dramatic light. This is early on in his career, and so he looks very young. But as he learns this, and he gets more sober, I guess you could say, because at the beginning of his career, he just shot up like a rocket in success, and was making lots of money, and was got married and bought a house, and was just spending money, and he was just a very different thing than what happens later, because he has lots of tragedies in his life, lots of death. He goes bankrupt. Uh, it's a very dramatic story. I mean, there are movies made of his life because of the drama of just the story of his life, of big rise at the beginning and then a fall, uh, where what you see in the course of his paintings of himself, you see how he changes. This is him at sort of much more, a little bit more middle aged, more sober. Um, he's in a pose taken from a painting by Titian, and he's showing how he's sort of bettering the Titian. But what's gonna happen as he gets older? You see his face change, and you see how he's more and more able to see the insides of faces. Look at that highlight. Look how sharp and bright that little highlight is. Uh, that has the effect of bringing all this other things together. There's contrast within his face. There's a light part here and a light part here, but this light part blends into other a little bit darker areas. Uh, so in order to make all of this look as though it's all one and unified, he has this one extremely bright but small highlights on his eyes. It just it makes it alive. It makes it um, look like a living person. Look at little bits of highlight right under there. And the change from one area of high contrast to other areas of low contrast, and it gradually changes from one to the other. And how he there's no polish. His as he gets older, there's less and less polish. You see more and more of the brushstrokes because he gets to where he can represent what he wants to represent as with the degree of finish that he wants, um, without having to go to polishing everything as he did in his earlier days. Here's another one. As he got older, I mean, he has lots of tragedies, lots of death. His first three children, I think, died within uh, just a few days after being born, and then his first wife died, and then um, I think his lots of horrible things happened to him. He lost all his money. He had to sell all his stuff. Another thing that occurred that was a tragic thing in his life was that the style that brought him this huge fame at the beginning of his life, this expressiveness, this sort of roughness, and the way he manipulated paint, was hugely desirable by all these rich people of the first generation of rich people of the Dutch Golden Age. But the next generation that came along, they were much more sophisticated, and his style sort of went out of fashion. And as he grew older, he continued with his style, and it actually became more entrenched with it and more expressive, and he more rough with it. At the same time that the market was moving in the opposite direction, it was moving towards more refinement. And as we see later, when we see like Poussin, um, the 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 look. Uh, if we go back to the Italian Baroque, they had those two currents, the Carracci current and the Caravaggio current. Um, um, they move in the direction of the Carracci rather than the Caravaggio in that second generation. So he's no longer in fashion. He no longer gets any commissions, and he becomes a has been. But he's very defiant. He uh, here he is representing himself in a much old advanced age, but he's representing himself wearing his painting clothes, his apron. This is an apron and goes around his neck here, and he has bits of paint on it where I guess he's wiped his brush off, and he's holding his maul stick. This is the stick you use to keep your hand steady. You hold it up against something, and then you rest your hand on it so as to. Uh, uh, it's just one of the tools of painting. But here he looks like he's a king. Think of Henry VIII painting uh, by Holbein in terms of the how close it is to the canvas. How he's right on the front, and he's made as though he's uh, much bigger as a result, and this having his arms um, in this pose sort of makes a commanding gesture, and this maul stick becomes like the scepter of a king. So he's completely defiant against the the new age of the new fashion, and that he's doubling down on the roughness of his painting style, which had become out of fashion. Just try to imagine painting this. Now, when I talked before, this is the one on your list. When I talked before, in the Renaissance, there's this contrast between the Northern Renaissance art and the Italian Renaissance. The Italians were more interested, say, in the rational space and the underlying structures of things, whereas the people in the North didn't concern themselves with the underlying structure of things. They were looking at the surfaces of things, and they were very good at representing surface qualities, surface material qualities, the way light falls on objects. But when you get to Rembrandt, what's going on is almost like a combination of the two. and going beyond that. It's not just what's on the surface or even the underlying structure. It's like the underlying spirit of things instead. This is him very, very, very late in life. Again, studying himself, looking at himself in the mirror, and like a scientist, seeing this is what he looks like now. He's not trying to make himself look better. He's not idealizing himself at all. He's just showing exactly what he looks like. He's old. His face is sagging. He's got a big nose. He's unkempt looking. Uh, Look at the brushwork of his hand holding the palette and brushes. It's as though he's gone beyond the need to show anything, and is just drawing movement and drawing life and drawing spirit. What's the deal with the circles? I don't know. It's probable that it has something to do with this defiance. It used to be drawing a perfect circle. If you remember the Giotto story with Giotto's O, that it is a sign of an artist being able to draw precision things freehand. It goes beyond Giotto. It goes early. It's from classical mythology. But it might be a way of showing that yes, he can do that. He can draw perfect circles, and he can draw that. But that's not what it's about anymore. It's about this, and about his his advanced studies in human nature and psychology, and and being able to represent his spirit. Here's a few more of his later ones. Let's look at his drawing here. This is one of the things about his drawings is that they're so calligraphic, and they're not really anything like the Western tradition. I mean, you look at drawings by the Italians, say, or the Northern artists like Bruegel has drawings. There's nothing like that. In fact, the closest analog to these would be like Chinese calligraphy drawings. The marks that he makes, they're just so expressive, and it's not like he's not about trying to illustrate the thing or the surface of the thing. He's drawing the life of the thing, and the I guess again the soul of the thing. And when he tells stories, like here's an example. This is called the prodigal son, the story from the New Testament, one of the parables that Christ told about the boy who the son of a rich man, and he wants to be given his inheritance early so that he can go out and live his life. And he does. He goes out and he wastes it all in sin, and goes to extreme poverty, and comes back and is forgiven by his father. And here you can look at the part of the story is also he has a brother who didn't go out, and is very resentful that his father is forgiving him because he didn't go out and waste all his money. But this is part of the story as well. But just look at all this. He has a big setting here with lots of stuff in the background, and he's searching. Look at these marks he's making, sort of searching for the forms, searching for the correct expression of telling the story. And he comes down to this relationship between the father and the son, and trying to say, well, how do you say the kind of graceful forgiveness, because the father represents God, and the son, the prodigal son, represents us, and in sin and in being forgiven. So when he came to the painting, he boils it down more to the essence of the story, just the embrace. And he's made out the prodigal son as dirty and forlorn and um, poverty stricken. Look at his shoes and his feet and wearing tattered clothes. And the contrast. The contrast with the father's clothes, the bright color here, and the embrace. Let's look back to this. I think this is a high resolution image. You can just look at this search that he's made. Very quick strokes. I think he's using a reed pen, like a bamboo thing that's just sort of not really sharp, like a metal point, but a blunt point. Uh, and you can dilute the ink and use it for the light lines, and you can have more stronger ink and have uh, the darker lines. But it just looks like it's a mess, like he's like someone who's looking for something, like he's searching. And he also does that with the paint as well. And then when he gets to the painting stage, he's got everything worked out, and he does a painting that expresses just exactly what the story is about. It's just about this embrace and this the unity that comes right here. Okay, so that's Rembrandt, and the next will be Vermeer.